Okay, we continue. We continue on that consciousness grind. All right, I did get rid of what I wanted to actually look at yesterday. I don't remember what it was called, so I think it's gone. Lost to the wind. Now, I did want to go through this monetization plan, but maybe we just start it today and then we call it there. But for now, I think we just continue. We start off with the question I asked about the neurons and how we can see predictive processing of some sort in different types of neurons. Then we will go to the conversation we were going with yesterday, but I put in a beautiful loop paper. I didn't realize that this is actually not the paper I read. I read this paper on the minimal theory of consciousness implicit in active inference, which also came out November of last year. So pretty recent. And yeah, we'll see if we can learn some stuff from that. I remember it being somewhat complex, so I don't know if we're gonna want to actually read it or just throw it into Gemini and see what Gemini says as a summary. Okay, so I was asking, can you help me understand the mechanism behind the layers 2-3 neurons? So we determined that the L5 pyramidal neurons have a mechanism for checking matches. So this is effectively a AND gate. And I'm wondering how this acts as some sort of error check, almost like a NOT gate, but we'll see. This is the final piece of the puzzle to complete your mental model of the cortical column. You are asking about the canonical microcircuit, the specific architecture that repeats all over the cortex. Here is how layers 2, 3, 4, and 1 fit into the machine, specifically contrasting the match gate of layer 5 with the error logic of layer 2 to 3. So subtraction logic, the error calculator. Okay. So it wouldn't be a NOT gate, it's just subtraction. No, it's effectively the opposite, right? Uses AND logic, that's layer 5, that's deep. Deep is in more outer. And we are looking for something that's a little in between. The superficial uses subtraction, cancellation. It wants to silence the signal when prediction matches reality. How do you build a neuron that only fires when you are wrong? You pit the inputs against each other. So, the excitatory input, the bottom-up input, layer 2, 3 receives raw sensory data, usually relayed from layer 4. This tries to make the neuron fire. +1. Inhibitory input, top-down acts as inhibition. The prediction from higher areas doesn't just hit the layer 2-3 neuron directly. It often activates a local inhibitory interneuron, like a PV plus or a SOM plus cell. So this is a neuron that is like, let's just say it's the preceding neuron in the chain. It's the neuron that's actually determining what reaches the neuron we're concerned about, dendrites, and that neuron is going to provide inhibitory signal via chemicals. Okay, I guess you could have negative and positive charge, and that's how you effectively inhibit. The interaction, like, I guess negative ions. I gotta learn more about ions. I gotta get Jago to give me the 1-2. The interneuron dumps inhibitory chemicals, GABA, onto the layer 2-3 neuron. Okay. The calculation. Perfect prediction. Sensory drive plus prediction inhibition minus... Okay, so this is obviously very simplistic. However, I'm learning about ions. Nice. Teach me everything you know. What led you to electricity or electromagnetism? I'm not sure what. Electrochemistry? Okay, so yeah, if we got perfect prediction, then that's silences. Prediction error would be you got sensory drive plus no prediction plus 1. How about, hallucination. You got the prediction, but you don't have the sense, so -1. That's hyperpolarization. The neuron is suppressed. So how does that affect outputs? The layer 2-3 fires. Spike travels up to the next area carrying the message. Something is here that you didn't explain. All right, layer 4, the loading dock. Why is it not included here? It is often omitted in high-level predictive processing discussions because it is viewed as a relay station rather than a compute station, but it is physically crucial. It's the primary receiver of bottom-up sensory data from the thalamus. Okay. Okay. The wiring. Thalamic axons terminate in layer 4. Okay, so layer 4 is where the global workspace connects to the cortical local networks. Layer 4 neurons amplify this signal and hand it off to layer 2-3 for the error check and layer 5 for the reality check. The granular layer. It is called granular because it is packed with tiny distinct neurons. Whoa. Absence in motor cortex. Interestingly, the motor cortex, which sends commands out rather than receiving sensory data in, has a tiny or non-existent layer 4. This reinforces that layer 4 is specifically for sensory input. Wow. That's pretty cool. So layer 1, the Wi-Fi antenna, the canopy. What is layer 1? Layer 1 is unique because it has almost no cell bodies. It is a tangled web of cables, axons, and dendrites. I see. This is where you get all the wiring. Remember the apical tuft of the layer 5 neuron, where the top-down context enters? That tuft physically lives in layer 1. The meeting place. Layer 1 is where long-range top-down axons from other brain areas, like the prefrontal cortex, arrive to dump their predictions. Okay. It is not a processing layer itself. It is the interface zone. When we say top-down signals hit the dendrite, they're physically hitting the dendrite in layer 1. Wow. Okay, like charge, potassium, etc. in the cell came up in the course. I'm trying. Cool. I remember back in the day there was a streamer who would stream violin practice and I would just practice for the time he streamed. Now I'm doing something similar with this stream. Hell yeah. That's very cool. I'm glad that we can influence that type of growth. All right, the whole microcircuit in action. If we put it all together, the canonical microcircuit for predictive processing looks like a loop. So the input, layer 4, raw data just arrived from the eyes, sends to L23 and L5. Okay, now I have to ask, why are we calling it L23? Like, why are those two layers intermingled? Why are layers 2 and 3 considered one layer? And then lastly, can you help me visualize where each of these layers are in the cortex? this simply the structure that all regions in the cortex take up? Is the frontal cortex simply the introduction of more developed regions with this same structure? Okay, so raw data just arrived from the eye, sends to L2, L2-3, L5, then context. Here's what we expect to see. It hits the tips of L5 and L2-3 dendrites at layer 1. And then the error check is happening at L2-3 and reality check is happening at L5. So if data matches expectation, inhibition cancels excitation, silence. If mismatch, excitation wins, fire up to next area. Hey, update the model. Oh, also, how does hyper polarization, is that what it was called? Also lead to how does the neuron firing, how does the 2-3 neuron firing as well as hyperpolarization lead to a similar output of abstract error? Okay, we got some questions. Should we jump around? I feel like that makes it hard. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to mention is that I've been popping off editing clips from previous streams. I think I'm going to try to just stockpile. And then currently, or at least this week, I released 2. So we released one today and Tuesday. 2 videos. Oh, we got nice. What do we got? Peters. Is this on the foundational? Wait. Summary: reflect on your actions and your situations. In the future, Stan will figure out how to do it and will tell you. Oh man. It is still the jury's still met whether or not Peter is a positive force in this community. Okay. John Smith, when Zarathustra had heard these words, he bowed to the saint and said, "What should I have to give thee? Let me rather hurry hence, lest I take aught away from thee." And thus they parted from one another, the old man and Zarathustra, laughing like schoolboys. When Zarathustra was alone, however, he said to his heart, "Could it be possible? The old saint in the forest hath not yet heard of it, that God is dead." Oh my gosh. What should I have to give thee? Let me rather hurry hence, lest I take aught away from thee. What was the word? What were the words? We can fix him, I believe. Nice cryptic. Haha. Just post. Oh, is that Nietzsche? I'll do a good old like there. But yeah, so we're gonna keep some cadence of releasing a video, and regardless of how many views it gets, I'm not going to market these at all. I'm probably just going to have them released because they're actually pretty easy to make. I can make one in like an hour, and provided I could find them, which fortunately we have all these transcripts, so that's helping me out. So I think I built a stockpile, then I just kind of schedule 2 or 3 to be released every week. Keep that up forever, as long as we can. I mean, we're constantly making new content in these streams, provided that I can say something cogent for more than 10 seconds. Surely that's just thus spoke Zarathustra excerpt. Okay, I need to know more. I'm curious what the context is. What could we get out of this? Someone replied to my video with this comment. Can you give me the background scoop of what it might mean in this context? Right? To understand why someone posted this on your video, you have to look at the scoop behind the encounter between the prophet and the saint. The hermit versus the prophet. The scene takes place as Zarathustra is descending from his mountain after 10 years of solitude. I see. He is heading towards the marketplace to share his wisdom with humanity. On his way, he meets an old hermit, the saint, who has spent years in the forest singing and praising God. The two characters represent 2 eras of human history. The saint represents the old world, defined by traditional religious piety, asceticism, and the comfort of a divine creator. And Zarathustra represents the new world, defined by the overman, self-determination, and the acceptance of a world without a supernatural safety net. The commenter included the part where they part ways laughing. This is significant because despite their radical differences, they recognize a shared aloneness and strength of spirit. Zarathustra says he must hurry lest he take aught away from the saint. He realizes the saint's happiness depends entirely on his faith. Zarathustra is essentially saying, I won't tell him the truth because it would destroy his world and I have nothing to replace it with it for him. Yeesh. Okay, so this is where he says God is dead. This is like that one time. And Zarathustra says God is dead. Nietzsche isn't literally saying a deity has passed away. He's making a sociological observation. Yep. Okay. Someone better tell the Hindus Bhakti is dead. They're busy blissing out. Oh, is there a similar type of situation happening in that culture? Okay, why are layers 2 and 3 grouped together? They are often written as layer 2, 3 or supragranular layers for 2 practical reasons. The fuzzy border in many species, especially mice and rats, where much of the data comes from, there is no sharp physical line separating them. Under a microscope, the cells just get gradually larger as you go deeper. Layer 2 has small pyramidal cells. Layer 3 has medium ones. Okay, so each layer they're getting larger, I'm guessing. Layer 5, L5 pyramidal cells are like huge, I think, relatively speaking. Okay, the shared job. Functionally, they operate as a unit. Both layers are the primary source of feed-forward axons that send information up the hierarchy from V1 to V2. In the canonical microcircuit, they act as the unified output department for the error signal. Okay, so they're dealing with error here. So visualization, the office build. Okay, to visualize these layers, do not think of them as different neighborhoods on a map. Think of them as the floors of the building. Okay, Okay, that's not what I meant by visualize. I mean within the brain, not a metaphor. Like, how should I orient my view when thinking about physical layers? Layer 6. There's a layer 6? Okay, so if layer 1... Yeah, I'm like, is this... are we talking... Is the back of the brain layer 1, are we saying? Or are we talking... Or is this just with the... You know, am I misunderstanding the scope of the cortex? Like, you know, when we're dealing with the... Is it just something like this? Or are we talking... Is it something where it's... I don't know if I'm making any sense here. I'm wondering if at each of these points that there's layers going down this way, or is it the case where there's layers going along? I could just look this up, honestly. Layer 5 cortex. Where are we at? Nothing? We're seeing... Would it just be so difficult to visualize this in the brain? Layer 2, 3. Okay, so no luck. Sage was practicing bhakti. A Hindu would classify it. One of the 4 main branches of yoga. Devotion to God, deity, a higher principle. I see. Is the structure universal? The granularity nuance, yes, but with renovations. While the 6-layer concept, neocortex, is universal, the thickness of the floors changes depending on the building's function. Okay, so for the visual cortex or sensory cortex, for example, visual needs a massive mailroom to handle all the data. Layer 4 is huge. The granular cortex. For the motor cortex, it doesn't receive sensory data. It sends orders. It has almost no layer 4. The executive suite is massive. I see. Prefrontal cortex. This is granular. It has layer 4, but it is tuned for internal data processing. Ah, that's cool. So for the prefrontal cortex... Does this mean that bottom-up data is not interoceptive or exteroceptive? I don't know if that makes if that's actually right, because you could say it's still interoceptive, but I don't think that's how we use interoception. In the sense that the data is originating within the brain. Is it still coming from the thalamus or global workspace? Okay, Source 3 original, what's good? You ever catch Gemini lying, like not contradicting itself, but just saying something you know not to be true? Yes, absolutely. Nope, we got to keep an eye. We got to keep our heads on a swivel with Gemini, all these LLMs, until they're good enough. That being said, it depends what domain we're in. Like, I mean, I do software, so when we're talking to an LLM about a specific library, then it's very likely it's just going to make something up, and you have to definitely check. But when we're talking about something like neuroscience, then it's pretty likely that it will be on point, unless you start asking I guess, really complex questions. Or the other thing is, like, it might explain something in a way that does work and does make sense, but it's just not the way that other people would explain it. And that's what I'm looking out for the most. That being said, I think we're still in safe territory here. But I am just relying on my intuition here. I do appreciate you looking out. Okay, I love thinking about how a lot of people practice the 4 yogas without realizing meaning. I'm not special at all as a meditator. Okay, I'm trying to, without like the meaning of it, or the meaning that I'm not special at all as a meditator. Without realizing. Without realizing what? Oh, you're saying, okay, I see what you're saying. Thinking about how a lot of people practice the 4 yogas without realizing that they are practicing the 4 yogas. They're just doing it separately. And then you're saying, which implies that someone who does practice them explicitly isn't special for doing it because so many other people do it. I mean, I do think that there's still like a benefit to knowing explicitly what you're doing. Like, you get to have that lever of explicit awareness of what you're doing and how it's affecting you, and that, I think, gives you a leg up in some sense. I'm not trying to say that there's like a race or one's better than the other here, but it in terms of, it gives you a leg up in your ability to pivot or build from there or learn from there. All right. You asked if the prefrontal cortex is just more regions. Yes, evolution didn't invent a new type of brain tissue for intelligence. It just printed more copies of the same 6-layer circuit and wired them up to talk to each other instead of the eyes. This allows the error signal to be about logic rather than light. Okay. Wow. The error paradox, firing versus hyperpolarization. How does firing, depolarization, and hyperpolarization both lead to an error output? Correction, they don't. In the simplified model I gave you, only firing +1 is an output. The hyperpolarization, everything is accounted for, is silence. But how about the opposite error? What if you predicted a face but saw nothing? That is also an error. How does the brain encode missingness? Right. If the neuron is hyperpolarized, it can't send a signal to say, hey, where is the face? To solve this, the brain likely uses 2 types of error neurons. A push-pull system. Okay, cool. That's what we needed, the mechanism. Positive error neurons, negative error neurons. So it wouldn't be the same neurons involved in false positives and false negatives, or however we want to think about it. All right, then I'm going to ask those questions. AI would have a better explanation, but try to do good to others. Karma Yogi, try to gain knowledge. I'm not sure how to pronounce the JN, but Jnana Yoga, work towards any idea above oneself, such as good. Bhakti Yoga, Yogi. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Yogi. You do some practice to bring the mind more under control. Raja Yogi. Nice. Okay. Very cool. Yeah. I think that is an intuitive practice in our culture, or a lot of those are intuitive practices in our culture. But once again, yeah. And I would say not only are they intuitive practices, but they're also like explicit practices in a lot of cultures, which does give that same type of power in terms of your agency, your ability to cognizantly move in that space. With that in mind, people can be great yogis who have never heard of Hinduism or even atheists, right? Or are even atheists. Yep. Yep. That's a great principle to, you don't want a yogi being about identifying as a yogi. Like that shouldn't be exclusionary or excluding. All right, visualize the layers physically. No metaphor. To orient yourself physically, you need to think in terms of depth rather relative to the skull. The orientation, imagine looking at the brain. The gray, wrinkly surface is the cortex. Yes. Layer 1 is the surface. Okay, this is the outermost layer. It is directly touching the pia mater, the thin membrane covering the brain and the cerebrospinal fluid. If you touched a brain with your finger, you would be touching layer 1. Layer 6 is the deepest. This layer is furthest from the skull, deep inside the gray matter. White matter, just below layer 6, the gray matter ends, and the white matter, the cables, axons connecting to brain regions, begins. I see. Gray matter is frontal cortex. No, I'm sorry, just the cortex. White matter is, I guess, other brain regions. So yeah, I guess within the cortex, would you describe, I guess you would still describe different parts as regions. When we talk about a cortical column or microcircuit, we are talking about a microscopic vertical slice cutting through these layers perpendicular to the surface. Imagine drilling a tiny core sample straight down from the skull towards the center of the brain. That core sample is the circuit we have been discussing. Great. The prefrontal cortex, what is bottom up? This is the most critical conceptual jump. In a hierarchy, bottom up is relative, but it does not mean from the eyes. It means from the step below me. Where does the data come from? For the pure prefrontal cortex, the bottom-up input is not raw sensory data, like pixels or sound waves. It is the output of the sensory association areas. So the chain, the visual cortex, bottom-up input equals pixels. The inferior temporal, bottom-up input equals shapes, edges from V1. Prefrontal cortex, bottom-up input, objects, faces, words from the inferior temporal. I see. So for the prefrontal cortex, the sensory reality it is predicting is not light hitting the retina. It is concepts appearing in the mind, right? Where is the entorhinal cortex? Is it in that chain? How does it connect to that chain? Does it come from the thalamus? Yes and no. Okay, that makes sense, right? The thalamus is giving everyone information, but also there's probably more direct pathways for the frontal cortex to get data. Much of this data travels directly from the temporal lobe, vision, sound processing, to the prefrontal cortex via long white matter cables bypassing the thalamus. The thalamus, though, the prefrontal cortex does have a specific thalamic partner, the mediodorsal nucleus. Unlike the visual thalamus, which relays eye data, the prefrontal cortex thalamus largely operates as a maintenance loop. It helps the prefrontal cortex hold thoughts in working memory. Okay, now I have to ask, when we talk about thalamus, are we talking about something that is connected between cortices? Or are we talking about something that each cortex has a separate version of? Help me relate this to the global workspace. All right, originating within the brain, you hit the nail on the head. In the prefrontal cortex, bottom up data can be interoceptive, yep, or mnemonic. A memory retrieved from the hippocampus. Cool. So top down, bottom up. Yep. All right, we've got questions now. I thought this was gonna take quicker or take less time, but we will still move on and get to the next topic in due time. All right, this helps connect the final pieces of the whole brain picture. You were asking about the interface between memory, entorhinal, consciousness, global neuronal workspace, and traffic control, thalamus. Where is the entorhinal cortex? Physical location is it located in the medial temporal lobe? Did we just mention the medial temporal lobe? No. But we did mention the temporal lobe. Right, okay. That's the inferior and temporal. And inferior, that doesn't mean below. That means more inner. Deep behind your ears, tucked on the inner surface of your brain, it is the main interface between the neocortex, the 6-layer office building we just discussed, and the hippocampus. I see. Very cool. Connection to the chain, the entorhinal cortex is the funnel. Sensory cortex sees lines. The association cortex sees faces. The parahippocampal cortex aggregates faces, places, and sounds. Aggregates in the sense that I'm guessing it knows when one, it's basically an input-output machine effectively here. Like when it gets this one data, it's going to output data that can now, leveraging the entorhinal cortex, compresses all that cortical data into a map or context. Wow. And then the hippocampus takes that map and freezes it into a single memory episode. Right. The entorhinal cortex, would that not be also associated with the retrieval here? Entorhinal cortex also be involved with, what's that? What's the what's unzipping? Oh, what's that topic or what's that concept called? MP4. What do we got here? Nope, I just need MP4. It's a container format, but what is the container used to store, but also, oh man, compression, right? That's what I'm thinking of. Decompression. But what's the word? I think that's not the word. Decompressing. Oh, this is, oh my gosh. Maybe it wasn't compression. I'll just use decompressing, that's fine. Decompressing memory data. I understand that it has been found to be used for conceptual experience, leveraging its geometric measuring capabilities to perhaps link disparate information together in the sense that signals can go to those areas for the sake of recall. This is not the best way to say this, but okay, the hippocampus EC system is the deepest generator. It doesn't just predict what I see right now, it predicts where am I and what happens next in this narrative, right? Yep, it's very fundamental. The thalamus, one building, many offices. Are we talking about something that is connecting between cortices, or are we talking about something that each cortex has a separate version of? Both. This is the key to understanding it physically. The thalamus is a one egg-shaped structure in the absolute center of the brain. Okay. However, functionally, it is divided into separate nuclei. We've got type A, the specific nuclei, the relays. Every sensory cortex has a private office in the thalamus. I see. Type B, the higher order nuclei, the connectors. The answer to the question. Yo, Onion Helmet, I'm fiending for some glutamation, bruh. I'm finna get me a Gluta meal box, a Gluta Happy Meal. Bruh, $10. This DoorDasher better not ask for a tip when I'm gluted up. Are you actually getting DoorDash? Because that's pretty exciting. Okay, so there's the two types, and then there's the higher order nuclei connecting between cortices. Some rooms in the thalamus do not talk to the eyes or ears. They receive input from cortex A and send it to cortex B. They act as the internet router, allowing the visual cortex to talk to the parietal cortex. Cool. Relation to the global workspace. How does the thalamic structure create the global workspace? It's not just a patch of cortex, it is a dynamic loop between the pyramidal neurons, layers 2, 3, and 5, and the higher order thalamus. I see. When a layer 5 neuron bursts, as we discussed, it sends a signal down to a higher order thalamic nucleus. For example, the pulvinar doesn't just swallow the signal, it sprays it back out to many other cortical areas simultaneously. All right, this creates a positive feedback loop. Cortex says this is important. Thalamus says, I'll tell everyone. Other cortices say, we see it too. And they give their feedback, and then it goes back and forth. This rapid synchronization, often in the gamma frequency range, is the ignition described by the global neuronal workspace theory. Okay, one last question. Unfortunately, I'm not. Oh, that's a bummer. That debate yesterday was wild. My favorite thing was when no one even asked each other what definition of consciousness everyone was using. Yeah, that's always the tricky thing here, because I guess someone who comes into this discussion and they're thinking consciousness is like what we feel, which first of all might even be, I'll say, tainted by the view that we each experience the world in the same way. So I tried getting around that. They're going to be, I guess it's going to be more difficult to explain how, consciousness might differ given different lesions, or how consciousness would differ in different species, or as, Dharmadam, as you pointed out, in a single neuron. Yo, Birdbanes, good morning. Oh man, are you also Australia? Do we have a bunch of? Is it Happy Friday? Singapore, nice, awesome. We're all over the globe. Okay, yes, the entorhinal cortex is a two-way street. It is not just the funnel that compresses reality into memory. It is the projector that decompresses memory back into reality. So, decompression, the index card analogy. If you asked if it decompresses data, the most accurate way to view this is that the entorhinal cortex holds the index code, not the full movie. Right. Compression encoding. The cortex experiences a beach day, millions of gigabytes of sensory data, sun, warmth, salt, smell, crashing sound. The entorhinal cortex strips this down to a geometric relationship. That is compression, right? This is like in software, you would say that this is like a compression algorithm. What was the tip to tip? Silicon. Yo. What was like the actual thing they were working on? Was it just a compression algorithm? Vohio. Unfortunately, I don't know the lore behind that one. Was tip to tip a compression algorithm? I can do this, right? On new Google. No, I can't. Okay. We're going Gemini. Technically, no, it's not a yes, but yes. Compression. Okay, so it is a compression algorithm. I see. Okay, the EC strips this down to a geometric relationship, the gist. Probably not just, I mean, not something simple, I'd imagine. The hippocampus binds this gist into a single pointer or index. Yeah, I doubt it's a single pointer, though. Would it actually be a single pointer? I'd imagine, even though there is compression here, the output data would still be quite complex, at least for the human eye. All right, decompression, recall simulation. Basically, it's just doing the opposite. When you want to remember the beach, the hippocampus fires that pointer back to the EC. The EC sends divergent signals back up the hierarchy to the specific cortical areas. Reignite the blue and bright pattern. Okay, right. Geometric capabilities, the cognitive map. This refers to grid cells, which are famous for mapping physical space, but we now know they map conceptual space too. And this was the whole, thoughts are in the brain topic. Imagine the entorhinal cortex creates a 2D map, right? Physical map, and then conceptual map can still use the same types of coordinates, but obviously not for physical space. So it's not the thing that's making us feel physical space, but it's the thing that allows us to process physical space, but it also allows us to process conceptual relations, which is really cool. This is the ultimate source of the top-down priors we discussed. When you walk into a room, the entorhinal cortex and hippocampus system looks at its map as in just processes. It calculates based on my current trajectory in this conceptual space. The next thing I should encounter is X. All this is obviously happening unconsciously. Yo, Energy Tomter, what's good? Hello, I have a question regarding your views on religion and God, if that's okay. Well, we've been having a pretty chill day, so let's let it rip. Let's let's see where it goes. Okay, yes, you're absolutely correct to challenge the single pointer metaphor. In computer science, a pointer is a single memory address. In the brain, a single pointer would be catastrophic because if that one neuron died, you would lose the entire memory. Okay, the biological reality is a sparse distributed representation. A chord of pointers and how the complexity works. Instead of thinking of the index as a single button, think of it as a piano chord. The neocortex, that's the experience. This is the full orchestra, millions of neurons firing to create the sight, sound, and smell of the beach. The entorhinal cortex and the hippocampal cortex? Or is this, is it just the hippocampus? I guess it wouldn't be that same structure. Because it's newer, or it's older, right? In a sense, this is a specific chord played on the piano, right? Compression, you have a reduced, yeah. You asked if the output data is complex. Yes, the pointer sent from the entorhinal cortex to the cortex isn't just a go signal. It is a high-dimensional vector. It is a specific pattern of firing across thousands of axons. Okay, that's what I was trying to get at here. Why it looks compressed compared to the sensory experience, which includes the exact photon count hitting the retina. This vector is tiny, but compared to a computer pointer, it is incredibly rich. The manifold, the shape of this, the entorhinal cortex is rolled. It doesn't just point to memories, it points to locations on a manifold. Imagine a crumpled piece of paper. Every point on the paper corresponds to a specific configuration of the world. The entorhinal cortex neurons effectively create a coordinate system for this paper. Okay. All right, I think we've exhausted this one, so we're going to the next one. All right, let me Google it quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was the response from Energy Dompter. Okay, do you believe the Borde-Goth-Vilenkin theorem is evidence for the premises in the first cause argument for God? Is it an argument for God? Because I could ask you that. I could answer your question right now. We don't even have to go into this if I think it's got the conclusion as evidence for the premises of the first cause argument, specifically the blah blah blah, is a subject of significant debate between philosophers. The beginning argument, yeah, I mean these are just, you know, this is another instance where it's going to be a semantic argument that makes sense, right? The argument's going to feel logical because the words are used in such a way that they can logically lead to the conclusions that you have. However, the error that happens here is you're using these words that might have multiple meanings or they're not precisely defined, and then you're able to create this type of seemingly logical sequence. It is the logical sequence. But the issue is it doesn't have the conclusions that you think it should, right? So, yeah. It's like a... It is a... I don't want to say like a bastardization, but it's a misuse. It's a misuse of norms that you aren't aware of. So you're like using these norms in such a way where it seems like it has a conclusion that it probably shouldn't have. All right, based on your question, it seems to be of the monotheistic genre. What is the majority religion in Singapore? I'm not sure. Let me Google quickly. The most followed religion is Buddhism, with 31.1% of the population identifying as adherents. Other significant religions include Christianity, Islam, and Taoism, and Hinduism, while 20% of the population has no religious affiliation. Singapore is probably the most religiously diverse nation. Nice. I'm confused. What's your counter argument? Once again, I'll say that it's not I'm not playing within the rules that argument sets up. I would say that our use of these... All right, let's get it back. Oh, I'm clicking everything wrong here. Okay, the beginning argument, proponents of that cite the BGV theorem as a strong scientific evidence that the universe or even a multiverse had an absolute beginning a finite time ago. This supports the premise that the universe began to exist. Okay, limiting escapes. The theorem suggests that even if our universe is part of a larger multiverse that is expanding, the multiverse itself must have a beginning. The theorem is considered powerful because it holds regardless of the specific physical laws operating in the early universe. Okay, I see what's going on. I'm gonna that's what the first cause argument is. All right, I should just say, like, right off the bat, like, this idea of the first cause argument, I think we're already done. Regardless of whether the science tells us that we're allowed to talk about the Big Bang as the beginning of the universe, which I don't think it does, by the way. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure we don't know. And yeah, if I could be wrong about this, but if this argument is like there has to be a beginning, therefore there has to be like a God that created it or something like that, something has to have been there before that created it, then that's leveraging our understanding of what ought to be before something, or what ought to start, like it relies on our intuitive understanding of how beginnings work, in a sense. But we can't rely on that, just because we have this cultural expectation that everything starts because from some other deterministic view. That doesn't mean that if the universe had a beginning, that therefore a God must have started it. Yeah, we just don't know. All right. Are you saying that you can't use the language of logical argumentation to prove that God exists because the language game being played is different? I'm I gotta try to figure out. Are you saying that you can't use the language of logical argumentation to prove that God exists because the language game being played is different? I mean, it's not that the language game. It depends what we mean by the language game being played is different. I don't want to get caught in like some Jordan Peterson build. I don't want to get caught in some type of like web here. Like it's literally just, we don't want to infer things that we're not allowed to infer. So the science doesn't tell us that because we don't know what happens before the Big Bang that we're allowed to believe in anything that could have caused it. Like, we're not allowed to jump to any type of God, right? Even if we had some logical conclusion that, hey, like, we know everything to be deterministic after the Big Bang, therefore perhaps there was something deterministic prior to the Big Bang that determined it, we have to be agnostic about what that is. We're not allowed to go to anything else. So any type of argument that, says that God must exist because the universe must have come from something is completely inappropriate. From what we know. That's what I would say. But yeah, what do you mean by language? What do you mean by different? Yep, I was indoctrinated in the school of JP. Yep. I've spent way too. I did watch that, and I did think it was funny. I did send it to Jago. Jago did say that he laughed. He was on a class, like he was in class on a like remotely, and he was he was trying not to laugh on it. So we did appreciate it. It is very silly. But yeah, good stuff. Jordan Peterson humor, I think, will always hit. Okay. let's lock in. So I realized that the paper that I've been talking about for the past like 3 days, this active inference theory of consciousness, is not the one I read. I actually read this one on the minimal theory of consciousness implicit in active inference. So I'm kind of curious how those even differ. But we'll just go one at a time. Okay, so I asked. Oh, okay. So it actually provided. Would you like to explore the predictive processing or active inference framework? It aligns much more closely with your physicalist view that meaning and consciousness are products of allostasis, memory, and error correction rather than fundamental mathematical properties. And I said, yes, let's do it with this contemporary paper on how predictive processing, active inference might most directly offer us a theory of consciousness according to the very criteria proposed in the what makes a theory of consciousness unscientific. How well does this active inference account do? It says the beautiful loop theory as proposed by Laukkanen, Friston and colleagues represents a significant shift from the top-down metaphysical axioms of IIT toward a middle-way computational framework called computational neurophenomenology. This approach uses active inference, the idea that organisms survive by minimizing prediction error, to bridge the gap between subjective experience and neural mechanisms. According to the criteria of the IIT concern group, here is how this framework fares in terms of scientific validity. Primary critique of IIT was its central metric, blah, 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 blah. In contrast, this one is built on active inference, a framework already used extensively in computational neuroscience to model and predict brain responses. The authors propose specific measurable broadcast channels for conscious information, neuromodulatory sprays like dopamine and serotonin for slow contextual shifts, and electromagnetic fields for rapid millisecond scale tuning. Unlike IIT, this explicitly claims to be testable at both the computational and neural levels. For instance, it predicts that consciousness should fade if long-range electromagnetic phase coupling collapses, even if individual neurons continue to fire, a phenomenon observed in anesthesia and deep sleep. Avoiding metaphysical overreach, while IIT posits that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe. BLT treats it as an emergent computational property. Consciousness is not just integration, it requires a system to model its own modeling process recursively. A axiom-light approach, instead of irrefutable axioms, BLT starts with the biological imperative for an organism to maintain its boundaries, homeostasis, allostasis. Consciousness is seen as a solution to general intelligence, allowing an agent to self-optimize by becoming aware of its own knowledge. All this stuff is not new to us, but it's cool to just see someone saying it, you know? And also, I think this builds this builds the context for why, I guess it builds credibility, I think, for the other paper when you have accounts like this that are leveraging all these things that we know about the brain. Then yeah, why would we start messing around with something like IIT's conclusions when they're significantly less grounded? All right. To be honest, I believe you're being kind of a skeptical stickler. What premise do you actually disagree with regarding the argument? I just don't want to engage with that argument. I'm sorry. If the universe had a beginning, which to me seems to be supported by the BGV theorem, it must have a non-spatial, non-temporal creator, since space and time are relations of events within the physical universe. Right, so even if I gave you all that, right, that there must, but yeah, that's the thing. The jump to creator is kind of wild. Actually, not wild. Let me say that. Let me say it again. The jump to creator is careful. Like we're in dangerous territory when we jump to creator, because people have a lot wrapped in what a creator means, right? When we're talking about a creator here, we have to be as arbitrary as possible, or not arbitrary, ambiguous as possible, abstract as possible. It could be literally anything. We don't know what it is. It would be it would be inappropriate, I would say, to anthropomorphize what that creator is. So that's the issue here. And the next jump that people might make is that it has some power over us right now. Like, there's nothing that says that that type of creator, whatever it is, whether it's an event or if it's some other system, whether that would actually have influence over us right now. So that's why I want to stay away from those types of discussions. These are precarious discussions. Because it rules out higher dimensional non-deity type beings because of the cause. Honestly, even assuming there is a cause, why is the moniker of ultimate power and presence assigned to the cause? Right? Viewers. We got viewers. We've got a ban. Or even if it's a singular cause, right? It could be a complex event where there's a bunch of different causes going together. If it's outside the physical universe, by definition, it must be non-physical, non-spatial, and non-temporal. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. But what are you gonna now imply, given that it's non-physical, non-spatial, non-temporal? We don't know what that is. We don't know anything that is non-physical, non-spatial, and non-temporal. At least nothing that we're allowed to say we know, according to the standards of science. And time are relations of events within the physical universe, to my understanding. Imagine you pass into the afterworld and then deadass. The ferryman asks you for a coin. You're cooked. Why? Because we don't have a coin? You're not bringing a coin? Also suppresses intent when there's nothing that hints at that, right? Yeah, we can't start introducing intent. We don't even know what intent means for something that's non-spatial, non-temp. We're still fighting on the front lines of consciousness in rocks right now. Like I wouldn't say that it's also a little weird to talk about intent regarding a single-celled organism. We can only talk about intent in some framework of... Is someone honking like constantly? In the framework of homeostasis. A non-physical, non-spatial, and non-temporal cause of the physical universe sounds similar to me, like the classical description. Yes, yeah, obviously. But that doesn't mean it has to be that, right? We're not allowed to just assume that it's the thing that people have been talking about. We can't just have some type of linguistic, logical evidence, like an argument that feels logical. We need the science. It needs to pass the test. If it can't pass the test, we're not allowed to believe in it. That's the point. It's so important, because people will do terrible things, with just faith. Faith isn't all good and roses. So it's very important that we are careful about these types of things now, especially now that there's a lot more, let's just say, wealth and power in the world. Yeah, we don't have to go too dark, but yeah, there's a lot at stake. It's not just pearl clutching or holding on to our, it's not just being ideological. It's not just holding, there's a lot of concern to be had with losing the norms behind science. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to read this paper at some, probably off stream, because it looks pretty cool. You previously noted that IIT's static measure fails to do that, blah, 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 addresses this through hypermodeling. Rather than a static snapshot, the hypermodel is a continuous, globally consistent loop that monitors how the system is deploying its attention, precision in real time. High-level models in the hierarchy encode abstract long-term predictions, allowing for a sense of continuity that transcends immediate sensory ignitions. Cool. The substrate question, cells versus silicon. The authors remain more cautious than IIT regarding substrate independence. They note that biological systems are leaky. They harvest constraints from their physical tissue and environment that a disembodied silicon system would have to simulate. While they suggest that advanced AI, like LLMs, might eventually satisfy these three conditions, they acknowledge it is currently impossible to determine if such a system would truly feel like we do. The philosophical zombie stalemate. Right. Absolutely. They argue that if a system satisfies these criteria and claims to be conscious, we are ethically compelled to assume it is to avoid colossal ethical failures. This is actually, yeah, this is the real question. So yeah, once we get to the point where we don't know, then yeah, I mean, I actually made this argument for animals, right? Like, it's not clear whether a pig experiences consciousness in such a way where they would obviously, if we were in that position, we wouldn't want to be suffering. So I think we should err on the side of consciousness of some sort so that we don't introduce a significant amount of suffering. It's still speculation, but we're trying to reduce expected error, let's just say. Okay, now how does this paper contribute to this discussion? And I will do this one. Okay. The only thing that matters is power. Oh man, Onion Helmet, I just edited the clip of when we went over the gurometer, the guru criteria, and yeah, that had me chuckling a bit. Hence, an empty cup capable of holding water has water in it. Yeah, going back to the IIT conclusion. Right, but the question is, it's an empty cup capable of holding water, but you can't see the inside, right? That's kind of the idea. But it's more than that, though. I don't think it's that would be a great analogy. It would have to be something like what would have to happen is you're blindfolded, and you're not allowed to actually like drink or pour or anything like that, but you're holding a cup. And it has the weight of water, and it feels when you're moving it around, it feels as though there's water dynamics happening, but you don't see it. Does it have water in it? And you don't know, right? Like maybe there's some funny business going on. Maybe someone simulated it. Maybe they put a bunch of beads that mimics the, who knows? But you just have to assume that there's water in it. Yeah, in that situation, don't drop it or whatever. If they assume that analogy sticks. Is there any amount of evidence that could be provided to you for you to be less intransigent in your skepticism regarding the existence of God? Intransigent. Unwilling. Yes. I think the answer should be pretty clear. It would have to be an angel in the night. Yeah. It would have to be some like empirical evidence. You know, that's what it would have to be. But more realistically, that's like the that's I don't know, that's the ideal answer, right? But more realistically, I am a human being, so the pragmatic answer is if everyone else believed it to be the case, and it became punishing for me to not believe it, then my brain would adjust and get to the point where I believed it. That's just how brains work, But hopefully that's not the position we go in, because I think a lot of chaos is going to have to ensue before that happens. What if it's wine in there? True. He did say that if an angel teleported him and told him God was real, he would assume someone was pranking him. It's going to be really hard. I'm going to need Sam Harris to tell me, you know what, I was wrong and God's real. That's what I'm going to need. It needs to be tailored for the genre of deity claimed, I think. Oh, that is true, actually, also. Is this why certain geographies are a mess? Oh, I'm not sure what that was a response to. Your water analogy is so close to elephant parable, but opposite conclusion. Right. Well, yeah, the analogy is specifically for consciousness, right? Or actually, maybe that's the elephant parable, but it's specifically for ethical consciousness questions, right? Even though everyone does experience consciousness differently, that doesn't mean that we should assume that they don't feel like we can't empathize with them. And even though we can't actually perfectly empathize with other people, doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. So it is normative, what I'm saying. You know, I think the elephant analogy or a parable is more fundamental. Like it's more true in like the deep philosophical sense. But I'm making more of a moral normative claim, what we ought to do. Because it's empty at the start, people will have to imagine whether it has content in it, what type of content, etc. I bet there are AI slot videos on Facebook boomer groups of Sam Harris confessing that he has. You know what? That's true. Like if someone showed me a video of Sam Harris saying that, then I don't think I would trust that. So I would have to see. I would have to see Sam Harris in the flesh. He's gonna have to give me a handshake. He's gonna dap me up, and then he's gonna tell me that he was wrong the entire time. That's what is needed for me to change my mind on this. The content uncertain, the conditions are right. Yep. Dude, tell me once Deepak Chopra debated Sam and he became a believer in God after. Like, no, where did you get that? Nice. You know, it's just in style to just spread misinformation these days, you know. All right, the paper on the minimal theory of consciousness, implicit and active inference by White et al. So this has a lot of people. This has a lot of hitters in here. We've got, nope, that's the last one. We've got White, Corcoran, Robinson, Smith, Moran, Parr, Friston, Seth, and Howie. Howie? I've heard of these names before. I haven't heard of the other ones. Okay. Okay, never mind. The paper significantly advances the discussion by moving from the philosophical hypermodeling of the beautiful loop theory to a more rigorous scientific hardcore framework. By using the criteria proposed in the IIT concern letter, we can evaluate how this active inference account addresses your concerns about testability, continuity, and the utility versus ontology trap. Okay, can we actually get a I'm going to rephrase this. Now, how does this contribute to the discussion? For this one, can you primarily give a summary, a comprehensive / extensive, the Onion special, yet not too in the weeds? I'm doing a live stream summary and also include references. Also include, and then also include how this contributes to the discussion. All right, that's good. That's good. Sam, morality is objective, but only my morality. Harris. That is true. That is a fair qualifier to give Sam. Granted, he would say that his morality is the objective, of course. Getting to the heavy stuff. Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff is actually like, this is too much. Too much is going on here. We got equations at one point. Yeah, we start going into, this is the free energy equation. And then I think it's leveraged here. I think this is also a simplification. Can we do this? Can we think about this right now? Variational free energy is the expected difference under the approximate posterior. Where's Q? Where's Q? Q. Yes, I'm going to not understand like probability arithmetic right now. Like I've been out of the math game too long. Between the log of the appropriate, maybe this thing will be able to tell us. Actually, maybe it'll explain it in a nicer way. Oh, here we go. Look at this. This is novelty. Next time you think about novelty, this is what you're seeing. Risk plus ambiguity minus novelty equals, I'm not sure. Ooh, this one's worse. We're getting natural logs in here. Ugh, just disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. All right. Are you sympathetic to Lakatos's philosophy of science? Because this seems to be modeling its theory off of that. Lakatos's philosophy of science introduces the methodology of scientific research programs, a hybrid model reconciling Popper's falsificationism and Kuhn's paradigm shifts, viewing science as competing, evolving research programs with a hard core, unfalsifiable assumptions, and a protective belt, auxiliary hypotheses, modified to generate new predictions, distinguishing between progressive, fruitful, and degenerating programs to define science versus pseudoscience. Maybe? I think we've talked about Lakatos before. I don't know if it's gonna matter. I did read something along those lines about research programs and consciousness research somewhere in here. Where was this? No, active inference, multi-persuade, no. I felt like it was earlier. Okay, so I probably read this on November 30th. Would it have been this guy? Oh, jeez. Not gonna be able to zoom in. All right, it's not important. We'll just maybe. I'm probably sympathetic to it. I don't know. Is a perfect companion. I think the AI is taking someone else's words. How would an AI make a determination of that nature? Highly suspicious. True. Oh, is a perfect companion. Yeah. I did not sign up for this. Oh, the math? Yeah. All right, this second paper is a companion to the beautiful loop. While the first paper builds a specific model of how consciousness works, this one takes a step back to ask what are the absolute minimum mathematical requirements for a theory to be scientific. Here is the live stream ready breakdown of the paper and how it shifts the entire debate. So maybe it was this paper that does go into that whole research program talk, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure where you, Energy Dominator, how did you know that that's what was going on here? Did you quickly put this paper into, or the title into an LLM? The summary, the math first strategy. Most theories start with a philosophy, like consciousness is integrated, and try to find the math to fit it. This paper flips that. It starts with a mathematical law, active inference, how organisms survive by minimizing surprise, and watches where consciousness naturally pops out of the equations. The hard core versus the protective belt. The authors use, okay, yeah, this is exactly what we were just getting at, Lakatos. The authors use a philosophy of science framework to protect the theory from being labeled pseudoscience. This is the the hardcore. This is the non-negotiable math. It states that all living things minimize free energy, uncertainty. If this is proven wrong, the whole theory dies. The protective belt. These are the specific models, like how we see faces or feel heartbeats. If a model fails an experiment, you don't throw out the whole theory, you just update the model. This makes the theory progressive rather than unscientific or degenerative. Okay, so we've got the non-negotiable math, and then we got the specific models. The minimal link, consciousness as a best guess. The paper proposes a minimal link. Conscious content is simply the brain's approximate posterior, its best guess about the state of the world. If your brain's best guess about a stimulus changes, your consciousness changes. It's a minimal link because it doesn't claim to solve the hard problem yet. It just provides a mathematical anchor for every conscious experience we have. All right, to see is to look, the access mechanism. This is the paper's slogan. It argues that consciousness happens at the discrete continuous interface. So continuous, the raw flowing analog sensory data from your eyes and ears. Discrete, the moment your brain has to make a choice. For example, is that a cat or a dog? And then the theory is consciousness is what happens when that flowing data is shrunk into a discrete, precise best guess that allows you to act or report what you see. How it contributes to the discussion. This paper is essentially a direct answer to the IIT concerned group's critique that consciousness theories are becoming unscientific. It solves the untestability problem. The biggest hit against IIT was its metric is impossible to calculate in the real world. This paper argues that active inference is already used to predict real brain data like ERPs, brainwaves, and reaction times. Because the math is already working in behavioral science, applying it to consciousness isn't a leap into metaphysics. It's just an expansion of successful science. All right, B, it replaces axioms with adaptive behavior. While IIT starts with self-evident truths that you argued are contingent, this paper starts with the biological necessity of existence. It says we don't need to guess what consciousness feels like. We just need to model what a system must do to stay alive. Consciousness is viewed as an evolutionary tool for making better decisions in a noisy world. All right, it addresses the static versus dynamic concern. Focusing on the dynamics of policy selection. It argues that consciousness isn't just a state you are in, it is something you do. To see is to look. By linking consciousness to action and sampling, it moves closer to the river-like flow of experience you described. All right, the substrate question. Unlike integrated information theory, which boldly claims a grid of logic gates is conscious, this paper remains substrate agnostic but cautious. It suggests that while the math might work in a computer, the precision and timescales required for human-like consciousness might be uniquely tied to our specific biological wetware. Okay. Conclusion for your live stream. If the IIT group, concerned group, is the prosecution saying the field has lost its way, and IIT is the defendant holding on to its axioms, then this minimal theory is the new evidence. It suggests we don't need to choose between cold physicalism and wild idealism. We just need a better mathematical map of how agents make sense of their world to survive. All right. When AI makes determinations like terrible or perfect and such to papers like this, it's highly sus. Don't you think? I don't think so, because it's, you know, once again, this isn't like the AI is making an intentional determination. Like, we have to really try hard to not anthropomorphize AI. It's just giving out text based on input, and yeah, whatever words it uses could be following whatever. The thing that's more sus is when it when it says nice things about us, because that's probably coming from the company that's selling the AI. That can be sus. So, value judgment for untestable and untested paper like this made by an AI feels like it's parroting someone else's words. Those, okay, so to be clear, this paper was not made by AI. You know, these are big names in the field. I'm sure they didn't use AI to write this thing, and that's what I gave it. You know, I gave it first a paper that was also not written by AI, and then I gave it this one not written by AI, and it's just reacting to things that were not written by AI. I meant when it says it's a perfect companion piece earlier. Right. A value judgment for untested and untested paper like this. Well, it's not an untested paper. It's a, you know, it's a. I mean, granted, the copy that I have here is a journal preproof, but as we could see, it's been accepted into a publication, and we've got big names here. These are like key figures in neuroscience. So so once again, this is the type of institutional mechanism that allows like someone like me to not have to go out and do science. I can now trust that this thing was done well, because other people accepted it. Other people reviewed it, and they accepted it. All right, I gotta stop yapping about this stuff, and maybe we just have Hank Green do it for us. And then we'll see how that goes. Yo, Delta Introvert, how's it going? Hello. No issue with the paper, taking issue with Gemini, when Gemini can determine the perfectness of a companion piece rather than simply saying it's a companion piece. Well, I think it's still just, you know, making inferences or conclusions based on the other text. So, I mean, if it can provide reasons, then I will, you know, I don't feel like it's too sus. Switch platforms for a moment. Nice. Right, like whenever Gemini says anything that I think could be little sus, you know, regarding anything that I write or anything that I think, I really look to the reasons that it provides and try to see if those reasons are sophisticated in any way. Like, do they make sense? Do they hold up? Are they connected with something else that I know to be true? You know, like where are we at there? And that's not the best. You know, it's not like the perfect tool, but it is, I think, a really effective tool or heuristic. All right, let's go. What's going on here?
I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what science actually is, in part because I've been working on a Crash Course series that is recently launched. It's called Crash Course Scientific Thinking. This is not as simple as one might expect it to be. It's going to be fraught. There's a great deal of disagreement about what precisely science is, but I'd like to...
This is great. This goes exactly to the discussion we had yesterday of struggling to, you know, actually pinpoint where scientific norms are. Like, who's adjudicating. I'm curious if you believe the universe probably had a beginning. I don't know that yet. I granted that for just the, you know, just making an argument, but I really don't know that. I could look up that person's thing, but I'm just gonna wait until I think if we found something out definitively, I think it would be bigger news, honestly. I think our science does not give us a clear yes or no on whether or not there is a beginning, except for the Big Bang, right? Like, we can just assume that's a beginning, or we can, you know, consider that there's There are theories that point out that there could be something prior, potentially, but we just don't know. So it's not like I'm almost not interested in it because there's nothing to be gained there. There's nothing useful, unless of course you're trying to use it to prove the existence of a god. But for me, it's not useful. How do we get a cause to its existence? What do you think would be that cause, if not something we could call God? The point is, we don't know. That's the thing. You're not allowed to just take something that we don't know and then give it a name. I don't know. We got to go back to that aliens video that Hank Green did, because he made the same argument. Just because we don't know what something is out in the sky doesn't mean that it has to be a UFO. A lot of people jump to the UFO because that's what's salient in our culture. They think it's like aliens and whatnot, but it does. You know, the discipline we need to practice here is to not jump to the conclusion. Did I get rid of my? I did get rid of it. Okay. I'm gonna have to read this one. It's one paragraph. Just to be clear, the physicalist view is predicated on the assumption that its own perspective is insufficient and lacking. The claim that neuroscience will never solve the problem is an untestable, unfalsifiable statement of metaphysical pessimism. Science operates on the explicit bet against such never claims. So yeah, we don't know. If our science leads us to a better answer, then we're allowed to use that answer. But until then, we're only left with, I don't know. I could call it Keith. I would call it Keith. Yeah, true. You know, once again, what is stopping someone who believes in a different God than you to say that it's their God? What is stopping that? What is stopping them? What do you have that actually proves that it's your God and not their God, given that same argument? And then I come into the picture and I make up a new God. I make up a completely new God. I'm still in Mesopotamia stuff. You know, I haven't left Mesopotamia. I'm into this is my Jordan Peterson education is left me. I should be able to remember these names. Marduk? Was Marduk the Jesus figure, or was Marduk the God? I don't know. I'm not using this to argue for the God of a particular religion, just a God in general. But why a God in general rather than something we don't know? Just because we have this idea, this possibility of it. Like the thing I'm trying to do in the document, part 1, is go the full circle. Figure out, why do we have this cultural idea of God in the first place? And we can, I think we can clearly see why that would have come about. Pangu, that might have been it. That sounds familiar. Okay.
To hit you with a 3-phase definition. And this is just me. This isn't the Crash Course team, and I'm not an epistemologist or whatever, but I am a science communicator. So here's how I think about it. The first phase of the definition is what science actually is. The second is narrowing down into what science currently is. And then the third thing is talking about what pseudoscience is, which helps me solidify my understanding of the first two things. And I'm going to try to do all of this as quickly as possible, but you will see that this video
okay, this is terrible.
It's not short. So I'm not that kind
He's leveraging the tool of giving a what something is not in order to show what it is, and I'm going to be all about that for this channel's lifespan. So I'm probably going to point it out whenever someone does it, because I think it's a really useful tool for your own self when you're trying to make sense of something, to constitute what it is by what it's not. And yeah, non-deity type higher dimension beings do not count. Oh, I'm sorry. Because I can't conceive of something that is non-spatial and non-temporal and non-physical that caused the universe to exist, that wouldn't be worth calling God. I don't know where to go with that one. I guess, yeah, just because you can't conceive of it and you can't fathom it, except for this one thing, like, yeah, I guess the argument is basically, because I already have a concept of what this thing could be, therefore it must be that thing. And I'm saying that your concept of what it could be is affected by your culture. You learned it. Someone taught it to you. You didn't create that, and the universe didn't create it, you know? It was something that was conditioned. Like the very feeling of certainty that you're having when you, I feel like I'm being too, I'm being too harsh here. But yeah, for any belief, that feeling of certainty that we have when we really know it to be true, including a pen, you know, we understand science well enough to understand that it is affected by our, or I should say, to have a pretty good idea, a pretty strong speculation that it's affected by our underlying physiology, and also affected by our memory in the ways that we can clearly point to. A lot of things are simpler than it seems. Yeah, honestly, in this case, like learning just this much about the brain, it's crazy. Like jumping into the brain, you could say like neuroscience is one of those things that people meme about for being really, being really complex. But once you jump into the brain and you really understand what's going on there, a bunch of other things become really simple. Like it's really just this at the end of the day. Now, obviously, at higher levels of abstraction, things are very complex. Like interpersonal relationships are really complex. And, how meaning or understandings change over time is incredibly complex. But to have that level of abstraction, that fundamental low level of abstraction, to understand what is going on is super simplifying in a sense. It's very clarifying. How do you define God? I mean, once again, I'm not in the business of defining what things are in some objective, absolute sense. Like we could have a ticker on this channel for how many times I'm going to say that. So when we're talking about anything, I try to bring up why we would talk about it in a certain way. Like, is it something that culturally is required, or is it something that culturally is expected of us? Like, obviously, I'm going to say this is a pen, right? But I'm not going to say that it's like objectively a pen in some transcendent way. Like the reason why I call it a pen is because I understand that everyone understands it as a pen. So when we talk about God, I think it's helpful to think about, because I do think that there's a lot of utility to be had about accounts of God from different religions. So when we talk about God, I would try to connect it with how I think the ideas and the stories of God came about, which is through a long period of people experiencing the world and trying to make sense of it. So, to just skip to the end here, the way I think it's useful to think about God is something like your own brain, your own consciousness, really. It's your own conscious experience. That's how I think of God. So that, to me, that makes sense of why I'm not in control over my thoughts and my really, it's as far as consciousness is concerned, it's not. I'm not in control over my thoughts. I can think of that being like God. God said, "Let there be light," and that's my consciousness. Now, I don't think that there's an actual God that's actually doing anything. I'm only conceptualizing my brain's activity as God, because now I can make sense of my own conscious experience through those stories. Those stories give me a lot of useful ways to think about God. God is a judge, because we know our brains will literally judge, or not judge us, but will make judgments through affect, through emotions, through anxiety, when we do things that we believe are wrong. And when I say we believe are wrong, it's like deep down we believe are wrong. And really, it's not things that like we intentionally believe are wrong. It's just things that are internalized and conditioned for us to believe are wrong. So Okay, a non-deity type higher dimensional being called Keith dropped a pebble and it rolled down an energetic rocky hill and knocked over a canister of primordial battery, and boom, there. That's when the first turtle was born. And on that turtle, then there came another turtle. And after like an infinite amount of those, then you got a universe. And yeah, I don't know any more of that story, but I'm not convinced. A lot of lay theists actually believe wholeheartedly in a deity. I'm not buying the we all sin, bro. God forgives us. Okay, so I do want to make an account of sin in part 3, and I do think that the idea of sin, the idea that we all sin, is like fundamental in some philosophical way, some conceptual way. Like we can make, yeah, in some way we can conceptualize our experience. And I have to put more thought into how I would do that, but I think it is a fundamental lesson that we can attribute, or we can connect to our own experience. All right, Stan is not a Platonist, guys. Psychology versus metaphysics, but which one do you think you were asked? Oh, you're saying like when I was asked about what I believe about God. Yeah, if we're just talking about God as like as some external transcendent being that has some power over the universe or even created the universe, I have to tell you that I'm not allowed to think that. You know, it's not that I like, you know, it's not that I don't know, how do I say that? I know it comes off terrible when I say it's not that I want to think that. It's, you know, it's just I don't think that's what we know implies. You know, I'm starting with the vast amount of collective knowledge that I understand, and it includes philosophy, religion, science that I've learned, and from all those things, I found that the most compelling is the norms of science, and I think that the norms, like what our science has found, what those norms have found, is a way to make sense of why people believe these other things. So that's why it's like the I don't know, the king move here. It's the checkmate. It's the thing that makes sense of everything else. It seems to me your point is this: because language is contingent, we can't describe whatever caused the universe to exist as God. It's yeah, can't in the sense of like normatively can't. Like you could, but the issue that I'm having in terms of why I don't want to do that is because I think that when I say that, other people are going to infer things that I don't mean by calling the universe God, right? You know, when people hear that there's a God, they think that God affects whether or not someone you know, in a benign sense, whether someone recovers from some illness, or they think that it's the God is there to punish someone that did something wrong, or they think that God's gonna, you know, they might think that there's a afterlife. In some religions, they might think that the only way you get to that afterlife is if you do things that we think are terrible. So, yeah, we're not allowed, or I'm not allowed to do so because I think there's too much ambiguity by saying that, you know, that a God is the thing that causes the universe to exist. We don't know what causes the universe to exist. Well, the brain is God. They believe in the demiurge. Not even that, since none of them bothered to gather gnosis. You only need one gnosis, that Christ died for your sins. That's Martin Luther pilled. I usually tackle questions based on the book club genre. Ooh, what's the book club genre? Don't try and prove God. That will set us back weeks. It will set us back weeks. I would say majority of people, I'm already stun locked by consciousness again. We're supposed to be doing, what was January? Attention and focus and stuff. We don't have enough time. I would say majority of people asking comes from the Abrahamic genre, and most non-theists formulate their automatic response based on that genre alone, like the singular versus multiple cause issue. Yeah, I'm generally just not interested in having like any of the God debates. I have a question related to active inference. Does active inference claim all experience is Bayesian inference or just perception? I think it claims that Bayesian inference is an effective way to model all experience. That doesn't mean that all experience is Bayesian inference, and the reason why I would say that is because then you might be able to infer that what we're doing in our brains is actually some sort of a Bayesian equation, but that's not the case. But I think that they're modeling activity and behavior in the brain using Bayes. So I've concluded that the universe has always existed. Nice. How did you arrive at your conclusion? Just a feeling, hell yeah. You know what? I trust your feeling, Onion Helmet, so I'm a believer. I might change it up next week. All right, just let me know. All right, we gotta continue here. We might run out of time, but we'll see.
And a guy who thinks that the first person to ever do a science was born in the last 500 years. Like Isaac Newton, huge scientist. People say he's like the best scientist ever. He's definitely a doer of science, but he didn't do many of the things that we would now consider to be proper science. Science, for me, and this is just me, is anytime you're listening to the universe and learning from what you hear back. And then, if it is more than that, it is also figuring out how to intentionally ask the universe questions in ways that get the universe to deliver an answer. So if you notice that the river floods most years, you have listened to the universe. If you notice that planting a seed from a red rose gives you more red roses, you have listened to the universe. I think that on its own is science. But for those of us who may want more than that, I am willing to allow that perhaps it only really becomes science when you ask a question of the universe designed to get an answer. If I cross a red rose with a white rose, will I get red roses or white roses or pink roses? Now, you're asking the universe questions. And when I say the universe, I don't mean this is just a thing about the like space and stars and stuff. I mean any piece of the universe. And roses are a piece of the universe, and a river is a piece of the universe, and you are a piece of the universe. I think that people have all
right, like it's just empirical. It just needs to be an empirical observation would be listening, and then I guess some sort of experiment or hypothesis would be the asking. What about Hilbert's Hotel? 1.5 speed playback, absolutely. Oh no, this is 1.25. Science has rules, follow the rules. Hey, fair enough, fair enough. What about it? Does Hilbert's Hotel not argue against the possibility of an actual infinite past? Dun dun dun.
Always done this. I think that people did it like before there were humans. This is how we ended up in a world with beer and bread and cloth and salted meats and persimmons. Science is listening to the universe and asking it questions it will answer. But that is not what we mean when we say science nowadays. There is a different thing, a structured thing, that is a real thing that kind of has the same name. It is a thing filled with experts and equipment and error bars, and it is a thing that is an outgrowth of asking the universe questions, but it's also an outgrowth of a philosophical movement that began not that long ago and has continued to evolve since then. And I also have a working shorthand for that thing that I'm gonna hit you with now. These are still people listening to the universe and asking it questions in ways it will hopefully answer, but they also had literally one single idea that changed everything and created scientific journals and the structure of a paper and randomized control trials and peer review and the entire field of statistics. It goes like this. Your ideas sound interesting. could you let me check your work? Now, this idea didn't really grow out of people like wanting to be really nice to each other and like get to the truth as a team. It grew out of people thinking they were right and wanting to disprove the people who disagreed with them, which is not really supposed to be a motivation of science, but it is. And what that motivation created was an expectation that the methods of an experiment and the data created through those methods would be made available for other experts to inspect. The scientist's job became to convince other scientists, and not with argument, not with like power and prestige lorded over them and ostracizing people who disagreed, not by like hiding all of their data and encoding it in secret notebooks like the alchemists did, not by closing down defensively, but by opening up. This is a cultural change that created what we now call science. And it meant the development of a bunch of tools, and those tools are now what we call science. The scientific method, the preference for ideas that are falsifiable, testing treatment against controls, standardized statistical tools for determining how likely it is that a result could happen by chance. The format of a scientific paper, all of these systems were built by scientists because they got tired of other scientists saying to them, okay, you might be right, but I remain unconvinced. All of these tools were developed as ways to speed science along. If everybody understands a tool or a procedure or a statistical measure, then it gets much easier to check each other's work. And if anyone ever says, like, I don't want to tell you how I got my data, but it is real and it's true, they just get laughed out of the room. That's not science, that's politics, that's lawyers. Scientists do a different thing than that. And if they're not sharing their data, if they're not saying, hey, you try, you do a replication, you show me what happens when you do it, then that's not science. And this caused a
Okay. 1 hour, bro had a lot to say. Here, there's a lot to say about the topic. Here is about perception from the perspective of predictive processing, which is the same as active inference mostly. Okay. It all began because someone held a grudge and was jealous. Yeah, so I think it is interesting to we got Lisa Feldman Barrett. We might have honestly gone through some of these topics pretty recently, because we did read through Lisa Feldman Barrett like 2 weeks ago. Please consult Oswald Spengler. The tomes don't lie. So yeah, I do find that he chose that one point as like as the interesting, or as the significant change. So I guess a couple things. If we were to compare here, the developing authority and method. Okay, what do we got? But within that grand unified story, the desire to understand and influence the material world with ever greater precision. So that's what I leveraged here. And what did he say? He what was the driving factor at the beginning? I don't want to go back, but it was similar, but it might have been slightly different. And then I think that I think in this telling, I don't make like a single significant shift. I try to make the story a bunch of shifts, because I think that's actually like, I think if anything, the way I do it is also too simplistic. Like, it wouldn't be just the shift of show the work. It would be all these shifts that I mentioned, as well as show the work. So, systematize patterns in the natural world to make it predictable. Yeah, then there was the alchemists who were kind of doing this with the spiritual still involved. For the alchemist, an experiment succeeded not only if it produced a predictable physical result, but also if it corresponded to astrological charts or felt spiritual significance. And then we talk about the Islamic Golden Age with the idea of a formalized, systematic, and repeatable experimental method. Was the insistence that to understand a phenomenon, the process must be deliberately designed to exclude the observer's own perceptions and bias. So maybe this is what's really Hank's talking about. But I do want to actually write down, and in the to-do, perhaps to look into that, the way that Hank described it, as maybe an effective thing to include here in this telling. In this video, Hank describes the significant change in science as the voluntary, the enthusiastic, voluntary initiative to share work in order to convince others of its validity. So eventually I'll look at that. Okay. I like how that Big Think video is titled "An Atheist" instead of Alex O'Connor. Right. Did you check out that Bentley Hart video? I don't know. I don't recall. Stan is going to gather the wrath of Reddit historians with the historic retelling. I can link it again. Yes, please. Was it something? Was it during this one, or what's your perspective on methodological dualism between the social sciences and the natural sciences? I'm not sure. Energy downturn. I'm trying to stay on this one topic. I'm sorry. I don't want to jump around too much anymore. Hank was strongly criticized for his AI video. Oh, what was his? When was his AI video? How recent was that? Copy. As far as I can tell, Hank's been popping off for like the past year, but you know, maybe I'm biased. I wasn't actually. I don't know. I wasn't watching Hank up until this past year, so I've created a bias, and now I'm biased. No. Okay, we still have that here, right? Yeah, I have it right here. I'm sorry. We have to jump back to all of these. Maybe that's tomorrow. Maybe we just start watching videos tomorrow. I'm not going to be here tomorrow. Maybe it's going to be Saturday. We'll see. We'll see.
Transition from here are things that we know, and if you'd like to challenge those ideas, then I will defend my ideas using whatever social and rhetorical power I have to. Instead, I believe this is right, and I will defend my ideas by letting you do the experiment yourself. And if you come up with like some other explanation, then I will further refine my experiments to try and ensure that I am right. You hear about this experiment about the swan neck flask a lot, where people were arguing about whether life could just arise spontaneously or whether it would have to be seeded by other life, like only from a cell can a cell come. And there were lots of people arguing about this. And people developed, I'm not going to get into the details here, they developed a series of experiments that each time someone said, okay, yeah, I see what you did there, but what if you do this? It's very important to understand. Nobody would have done these experiments. Nobody would have designed better and better and better experiments without, one, argument, but more importantly, two, without doing this all in public, where everybody could see it and everybody could argue it and everybody could like come up with their own theories about what was going on. So this is what science has become. When we say science, what we usually mean, well, sometimes we mean like a body of knowledge. That's definitely not what science is. Science isn't all the facts in the fact book. When we say science now, what we tend to mean is it's a bunch of tools for making evidence uncovered by asking the universe questions difficult to challenge, and thus much more likely to be right, or at least, if, you know, there's epistemologists in the chat, what is truth, but at least more representative of reality. Science is our attempt to be less wrong over time. By the way, science is our attempt to become less wrong over time. That is a shirt that you can get, and it will help support Crash Course if you want to get it. Now, I also think it's definitely true that this...
I always want to like support, but these shirts are so loud, or there's so much going on that I can never... Wrong, crossmark. You just got to give the definition of science and say this is what it actually is.
This rigid box of what science currently is limited. And it's not necessarily even reflective of the actual processes of science. Lots of science doesn't fit neatly into the scientific method. There's a huge amount of noodling around and taking things apart and putting them back together again, and like seeking out personal inspiration and motivation and discovery-driven tinkering. That's all very important to science, as is people feeling strongly about their ideas being right and having fights with people who disagree. That doesn't like fit into the framework of objectivity. But it is still a thing because science is done by humans and we're working with this software. Galileo, let me hit get you with Galileo. Everybody talks about Galileo like he was the one rational actor in a giant world of idiots who wouldn't take their blinders off. But Galileo's telescope was bad. Like, it was the best, one of the best ones that had ever been invented, but it was bad. It would show weird artifacts. It would show double stars. People thought that perhaps the moons of Jupiter that he was seeing through his telescope were just the artifacts of the glass lenses. And they might have been right. Like, he felt like he had a good explanation for the solar system in his guts, and he had some good evidence to support it, but there were perfectly legitimate arguments against his perspective, and they fought about this because they liked their ideas, which I do still see happening in science these days all the time. Ultimately, Galileo turned out to be right, but he might not have. He was wrong about a whole bunch of other stuff, like when he was proposing that the Earth was going around the sun. He wrote that that also explained the tides, because as the Earth moved around the sun, the oceans would like slosh around. And that's like not good. That's like bad science. Like, people at the time, they'd known for a long time that the tides were linked to the movement of the moon and had nothing to do with the sun. Kepler was actively publishing about it at the time, but Galileo could not accept this weird idea of things acting on each other from a distance, even though that's the very thing that was keeping the Earth going around the sun. Anyway, it's great. It's great. You know, it's not perfect. And I have no idea where I would have sat on that debate at the time, because it was all very mysterious and confusing, and no one would have proved anything to anyone if there weren't a bunch of people all trying to prove each other wrong, but being required by culture or etiquette or their own sensibilities to not just argue rhetorically, but to make their methods and their data and their tools available to other experts. So everything in science is emergent of these two things. One, I am listening to the universe and I am trying to ask it questions it will answer for me. And two, I am open to the ideas of others, but only if they will let me check their work. That's the majority of the story, but I do want to finish this off.
That is a pretty good way to simplify it all. What's he trying to say? In new truth are counterintuitive. New truths are counterintuitive. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that anything that's counterintuitive is a new truth, which I think a lot of people will take and run with. I read a quote yesterday that said something along the lines of, there are two types of scientists, those who follow the rules and those who have theorems named after them. Very nice. There's granted, there's certain rules that you do have to follow, like intrinsically, right? Like, there's rules that pertain to your ability to show that it's empirical. And then there's rules that, like, you know, revolve around scientific institutions and yeah. I mean, obviously there's now rules of ethics that we care about. You know, that what you just said there, that you know, Elon Musk is going for a theorem, right, with his monkeys and Neuralink. But that doesn't mean that it's good, right? I think those who follow the rules refers to scientism. Chris Fields has great lectures about science and intuition. Nice.
By kind of checking my work, and I want to do that by looking at something that definitely is not science, which will have the added advantage of explaining what pseudoscience is, which is great because I think everybody misunderstands it. We sometimes use the word pseudoscience as just like stuff that's wrong. You know, anything that's pseudoscience is like somebody making a claim that's wrong. That's not what pseudoscience is. Being wrong happens even in science. If just being wrong made something pseudoscience, then physics before 1905 was kind of pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is also not like stuff I personally disagree with or stuff that makes me uncomfortable. Science says, here's my idea, and here's the method I used to get it, and here's the data I got, and here's what I think it means, and if you think I'm wrong, here's everything I used so that you could check for yourself. You could do the replication. Outgrowing from all of this is all of the tropes of science. It's the papers, it's the citations, it's the graphs, it's the stats, it's all of the stuff. Pseudoscience is a way of marketing ideas by making the ideas sound science-y, like attaching the legitimacy of science to those ideas without actually performing any of the actions of science. It borrows the graphs and the citations and the terms and the confident tone because those tropes are persuasive and they are legitimizing. You latch onto the credibility of science without engaging in the hard parts of science, the messy and expensive and time-consuming work of science. And the annoying part of being like, okay, here it is, check my work. Here, critic, you disagree with me. Have at it, you know? That uncomfortable part. They don't have to do that part. They sometimes say that they do or that they will, or like, I'm open to all interpretations, but when they get feedback, they are invariably antagonistic to that feedback. And there is one thing that I've not actually seen people talk about this that much that actually outlines for me kind of what's going on with pseudoscience. And I'm trying not to be too mean about it. I'll try. One of the things about scientific discoveries is that they're usually like not that interesting. And even when they are, they're like confusing and they require a lot of knowledge to understand what the heck is going on. Like they'll tell you that they detected gravitational waves, but what is I don't know what that is. They'll tell you like maybe the cosmological constant isn't constant. And you're like, okay. And that's the interesting stuff. right? Like almost all of actual science, like any individual paper that gets published, like you don't care. It's not at all interesting to you. Here's a good example. There's like a little controversy in biology right now, and it's in a corner and like nobody talks, like it's not like a big thing, but it's interesting to me. There's this question of whether it might be possible for a lineage of cancer cells to over time evolve into a free living organism, and whether that has actually happened. And there are some potential candidates for existing living single-celled animals that might have evolved this way. Now, most people disagree with this. They don't think that this has happened. But there are people doing research and writing papers to argue about whether it might be possible, and if so, whether it has happened. Some people are writing papers analyzing the genomes of these single-celled animals and talking about how they may have evolved, and other people are writing other papers and talking about other ways that those particular genomes might have evolved. And it's all very specific to taxonomy and genomics and like all these little details. And the most likely thing that will come of this is that someday everyone will agree that actually everything is the way that we thought it was. But even the interesting outcome, that a line of cancer cells could become a free living organism, isn't that interesting, right? It probably, I don't think it would make headlines. Like, I'd want to make a video about it, but I probably wouldn't. I'd probably be too busy, and I probably wouldn't make the video. And I would guess that if this video gets watched by 100,000 people, that maybe one of them has heard about this idea. It's called the scandal hypothesis. Maybe two. I have talked to lots of cancer biologists. I have never met a cancer biologist who has heard of this idea. It's interesting, and
That means maybe 4 to 8 people know about it that have watched. Okay, I don't like labels. I like expertise. Okay, Hank, I'm gonna need you to pipe down. That's the running joke. Anytime someone's speaking or I'm reading anyone, you need to pipe down. Okay, what was I was gonna make a comment about. Yeah, so I'm curious if that paper we read yesterday, if by his definition, integrated information theory counts as pseudoscience, because it starts to do all those things, but the question, like, integrated information theory isn't hiding anything. They're not saying like we've done things and we're not going to show you the work, but they have, I guess they've made a semantic trick, or they've done a semantic trick. Obviously they don't think they have, but they've done something semantically that now makes it seem like they're purporting something that perhaps they shouldn't be. And that's where the pseudoscience could come from. Welcome back. Hank 100% would think IIT is pseudoscience. Okay. Let's go and ask him. That would actually be an interesting question.
I like it because it's an example of where there actually is debate in science. There's lots of places like this. There's lots of debates going on in science. They just aren't about the things that pseudoscientists bring up, and we're about to find out why. Because most of science is way more boring than the scandal hypothesis. It's figuring out a new cell signaling pathway, or cataloging the feeding strategies of a species of frogs, or developing a new and better method for estimating the number of red dwarfs in the Milky Way. And you'll notice something. Pseudoscience is never going to touch any of that. Pseudoscience is always, and I'm not saying sometimes, I am saying always, it is always about some very attention-grabbing thing. Sunscreen, you thought it was good, but it's actually bad. Vaccines, you thought they were good, but they're actually bad. Diseases can be cured in simple ways that nefarious groups are hiding from you. The pyramids were actually created by an ancient civilization, or possibly aliens, or possibly both, I think. These ideas are very interesting. Like, I think that the idea that a line of cancer cells could potentially evolve into a free-living organism is pretty cool, but it's definitely not as cool as aliens building the pyramids. That would be a really big deal. That would be exciting if we found that out. And certainly, like, a free-living cancer lineage is not as vitally important to my life as cures for diseases being hidden from me. If I had to imagine the most interesting, attention-grabbing idea possible, there'd be an element of like, this thing that everybody thinks is good is actually bad. Like, that's very attention-grabbing. There'd also probably be an element of like a powerful force that is doing something nefarious to me, who is unpowerful. The idea of being manipulated and controlled by something much more powerful than me, especially if that's like somewhat shadowy, or if I'm like supposed to trust it, but actually I shouldn't trust it. So again, kind of a good thing is actually bad vibe. And then the final thing that I'd toss in is like, and it is causing direct and immediate harm, not to you, because like that's bad, but what about even worse than that? It's causing direct and immediate harm to your child. So imagine a thing.
All right, let's be honest here. Hank, 100% with... okay, never mind, I didn't see that earlier. Thank you, Karl Popper. IT might be pseudo, but it can help check or develop interesting things, ask good questions. Yep. Doesn't need to be true to be productive. Right. The question that paper was saying, though, is can it be destructive in a way that then makes it more gray as to whether it's more destructive than productive. Keith built the pyramids. Haha, very nicely done. Going full circle.
That we thought was very good, that turns out to be very bad, that's being imposed on you by a powerful thing that's much more powerful than you, and it's doing direct and immediate harm to your child. And I think that you've probably got the thought in your head by now, but I'll just say it out loud. That's the idea that vaccines, which we had previously thought of as like a very good thing, actually are bad and are doing direct and immediate harm to children. And all these people who say that they're just trying to do the best for you, they too are, you think they're good, but they're actually bad. Man, I tell you what, this thing you think is good is actually bad. Top tier clickbait. Like, that gets you so many views. I mean, you're talking to the guy who knows. Pseudoscience is the act of taking something that would be super interesting if it were true, and then surrounding it in the tropes of science to make it seem more true and more legitimate. You don't.
Now, the thing that we have to point out here is that even if there is something that is crazy and sounds too good to be true, that doesn't mean that we're allowed to jump to it's definitely pseudoscience. For example, the falsifiability whole catastrophe, that turned out to be like the perfect salient non-pseudoscience story about science itself. Like, that was really salient because it had that plot and it was legit. So, but of course that's very rare, and we still we still need to follow those the rules that he brought up. You know, we really need that work. We need to see it. We need to be able to do it. We need to be able to reproduce it. What Hank doesn't understand is that power is everything. Another victim of the just world theory. Oh, what's the just world theory? But jumping is so easy. Jumping is pretty easy. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the one with power here, Hank. Alrighty.
Do good statistics, you've got citations, but they link to blog posts, and you never ask anyone who might disagree with you to critique your ideas. But if you're savvy, you'll say that you do. You'll invite it because that makes it look like you are doing something that's more like science, but then when they actually do critique you, you don't like go back and try to make your data better. You don't respond to it. You don't do science better because you never did science in the first place. You just read stuff. So you didn't have methods. You didn't really even do statistical analysis. You just sort of like were making a case because there was a lot of attention to be gained by making that case. There are legitimate controversies in science. There are places where people disagree. There is not currently consensus around whether or not a lineage of cancer cells can become a free-living organism. But this process where people get extremely focused on the most attention-grabbing ideas possible and then surround those ideas with the vibes of science without actually doing any science, that's pseudoscience. From our little exercise here, what becomes quite clear is that pseudoscience isn't a knowledge-building strategy. It is an attention-building strategy, which is why I'm not surprised that it has become more common in our very attention competitive era. I think this helps show us what science is and isn't. Science isn't arguing like you're a lawyer. Though sometimes scientists do this, and I don't like it when they do. I think that it demeans science a little bit when you pop on the internet and you start arguing like a lawyer. I don't know the best way to deal with the sort of sets of problems that we've got right now, but that's not how I like to do it. I like to try and do it in a way that like accepts that people have a different view of the world. This is much more labor intensive, and I feel like is a little bit screaming into the void because I don't know how to not do it just one person at a time, but whatever. What science is not. It is not arguing like you're a lawyer, where you fight for your idea, tooth and nail, truth be damned. Science is where you argue like a scientist. And you do that by using a lot of built-up infrastructure around open critique and shared data and shared methods and shared strategies for processing data. And yeah, it turns out that the pseudoscientist is largely ignored by the institutions of science because it doesn't fit in. It's not doing the science part. And there's no way for that to be clear to the average person. And so this can actually be advantageous to the pseudoscientist. They don't actually have to care about that. Maybe because they know that they are right regardless. I think that some people certainly, I think this is mostly the case. Mostly they know that they are right regardless of what the universe is telling them. And so they're out there looking for anything that will confirm their perspective. And then they latch onto that as truth. And I think that in part, it's because ideas that are very attention grabbing, we tend to find them easier to believe. Like, there's a weird thing about people. There's research that if like a phrase rhymes, we're more likely to think it's true than the same meaning in a non-rhyming phrase, because the rhyming phrase is easier to pay attention to. Isn't that weird? It's so strange. And so like this very easy to pay attention to idea of pseudoscience, which is like maybe aliens did the pyramids. It's very easy to pay attention to. It's a cool story. Very exciting. Our brains can actually think, well, if a thing is easier to pay attention to, it's actually more likely to be true. Or if not that, then like I enjoy this story, and so I'm going to look for reasons why it might be true. And maybe enjoy is the wrong frame, because of course vaccines being dangerous is not an enjoyable story, but it is a titillating story. It is an attention-grabbing story. It is a salient story. That's like the real word here. And I hesitate to use the word salience because I think it's not.
Stole my word. Hank needs to get power billed ASAP. I don't think that's appropriate for this stream. Humans are natural jumpers. I will follow you into battle. Oh my gosh! Oh, when we go into our lawyer battle, we should become the strongest team of lawyers. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And then what is this? We got raised fist. Disappointed raised fist.
Not like a well-known word. We should all know it more. But at the root of pseudoscience is salience. It's how easy is it to get someone to pay attention to this topic. Whereas at the root of science is truth. And those are two very different things. So that's pseudoscience. People who don't really have an interest in engaging in all the messy, slow, esoteric processes of science, even though those are the processes that developed for actually coming closer to truth. And instead, they take all of the legitimacy that long process has built over centuries, and they connect to it. They perform it. They wear it as a costume. Pseudoscience is the process of attention merchants wearing science suits. And they could not exist without the trust gained by the winds of science, which makes it remarkable that they continue to exist while intentionally, or I don't know if intentionally, I don't know if I should imply intentionality, but while undermining science. So by looking at that one thing that is not science, this helps me see what science really is. And that is bigger than just the current methods we have. Our current methods for asking questions about the universe, which we call science, is an outgrowth of our long-lived innate ability and desire to listen to and learn from the universe. And that outgrowth has been standardized because it makes it more useful, but that standardization can also make it more limiting. There are many ways to uncover evidence about the world, and we've worked out some truly, truly powerful tools that have delivered remarkable gains, including my continued existence on the planet. But sometimes when you create a bunch of standardized rules, it makes it harder to do certain kinds of exploration of the universe, and I think that's something that we should be cautious about. And I will defend science from charlatans more interested in looking sciencey so that they can get attention or push their predetermined narrative, but I will never tell you that science is locked into a rigid box, must always follow the same methods, or can exist only in a world of pure objectivity, especially that last one, because a huge amount of scientific progress has come from accepting that objectivity is very difficult, if not impossible, to attain, and so experiments must be designed to reduce or eliminate opportunities for human bias creeping in. Science can...
Yes, the tricky thing is, like, technically, like this, whatever we would call it, the spirit of science in this case, does open the door for the possibility that our very mechanisms of science currently can be replaced by mechanisms that we end up believing are more effective at doing what the previous mechanisms do. So, you know, it's like, you know, I always talk about these norms, but it's like there's a fundamental meta norm behind science that really is the idea here. Granted, it's really complex to talk about this because, you know, it's similar to how, like, Jordan Peterson talks about stories becoming crystallized over time. That's kind of the way I see our development of of scientific norms. Like, it's not just it's not just the methods that are taught in those textbooks. It's how do I say this? It is intertwined with our culture around logic in general, and what constitutes logic. Like, these things are so close together. All right, curiosity is a wonderful thing, but it also strongly desires an answer. Therefore, it builds a narrative that seeks to plug that hole in knowledge. Storytelling not based on verifiable facts brings the wonderment that appeals to the untrained. Right, so that's a great way to connect back to this whole active inference. Like, the idea of active inference is that you are acting to fill that gap. You're acting to make what is uncertain certain. or to make what you, I think that's always it. And a lot of the times when I say what's uncertain, it's something that's, you know, very much a possibility, like a clear possibility. But then sometimes it's a possibility of you don't know what it is, and you're always, you know, acting towards that. So in the case of something huge, like we don't know why the universe started, our brain is going to want to arrive at some conclusion for that, because it's going to feel better than, and perhaps it's even more actionable, right? It's not just that it feels good. It's not just like you're getting a high. It's like literally more actionable. There's so much riding on it that it could lead to things that would make you feel like immense meaning. Your brain's going to want to do that. That's still all in this idea of allostasis. You know, it's just that this is how the brain operates. This is how it evolved. And yeah. But I like stories. True. Stories are great. Stories are cool. All right, we're going to go for 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to skedaddle.
And will change its methods as new and better methods are developed. And all along, the human will remain, the individual person who suddenly thinks to themselves, wait, what if, you know, like that piece, that inspiration, that human thought piece, that's also part of it. But it is kind of nothing without all the other parts. Science is a set of tools for making inquiries of the universe. It is how we become less wrong over time. And we must remember the tools we have, know them well, and seek to create new ones. And I love watching that happen.
Yeah, just to make clear, like, how closely this is connected to norms and culture. Like, you couldn't just take these tools and give it to someone 2,000 years ago. They wouldn't be compelled by it. They wouldn't find it salient. So it's the science is in the culture as much as it is in what we think of it when we, you know, think of the strict ways to follow these rules, or the scientific method as we read it on paper, etc. Active inference is more fundamental than free energy principle. Right. Because so the way I would go with that is what free energy principle is a slightly higher abstraction interpretation of why it's doing the thing it's doing. Active inference doesn't need to know what the goal is, right? Active inference doesn't need to care whether or not energy is the part of the goal. But free energy principle says, okay, but here is the goal that the active inference, the underlying allostatic process is acting towards. Because to have observation, we need to spend energy. I guess that's another way to go about it, but to have observation, we need to spend energy. To do anything, we have to spend energy, I guess, in some sense, for anything to move. Old school magic shows bring in more crowds and money than science classes. Absolutely. It's fun. We should get a magician on this channel.
But as we say here, everything we know is something we figured out. And I learned so much from working on and hosting the new Crash Course Scientific Thinking course, which we just recently started uploading. 1 episode is, maybe 2 episodes are out now. And I had an idea. I thought it would be very cool to interview Megan Modafferi, who is the executive producer of Crash Course, about how Crash Course works, about how science works. Also just chat about like the world of information and pseudoscience and why we've never done a Crash Course on math. Everybody, here is that chat with Megan, the executive producer of Crash Course. But before that, yes, you can get this shirt. Science is our way of becoming less wrong over time. You can get it right now, and I do not know for how long, but you can get it right now at complexly.store. There's also, as you might expect, a link in the
Is this like an ad in the middle here?
Description.
So currently I'm executive producer at Crash Course. We have 2 kind of teams within Crash Course. One is the editorial team, and that's made up of writers and editors. And then the other side is the production team, and that's made up of producers and APs and video editors. And I kind of liaise between the 2 sides. So for any given series, we begin by developing a curriculum, we write scripts, and then those things evolve into videos that we shoot and edit and add animation and design and elements to.
Yeah. So you are what one might call the boss.
I am what one might call the boss. Yeah. At the time of doing scientific thinking, I was the editorial director, so I was only the boss of the word stuff, and now I am the boss of all the stuff.
You did come from the editorial side. I always am surprised that, like, at Comic-Con, you think more about Chris Hemsworth than whoever wrote that movie. Because what did Chris Hemsworth do? He came out and he said the words. So for clarity, what's my job, I should say? I am the host of Scientific Thinking. My job was not, in this case, it is sometimes, but in this case, it was not just Hank show up and say the words on the teleprompter. You actually did give me
okay, he's still talking to us. I'm gonna skip ahead to when he's not wearing his headphones. Is he wearing the headphones for the entire thing? Oh, then we're done. Oh my gosh, look at that. Yeah, it was just a 25-minute one. Okay, go to 2 times speed. Yeah, just fly through. Wasn't Crash Course criticized once for teaching false information? I mean, Crash Course, I think, is like an internet legend at this point. But
Khan, you think more about Chris Hemsworth?
Like, I feel maybe the same way as Kotska's got, where it's like they're popping out high-quality videos constantly. If they have messed up and had like an outdated information video, then, you know, it would be great for them to fix that and to apologize, but I'm not going to hold it against them forever. You know, I'm not going to say Crash Course was the one that, you know, had outdated stuff forever. I'm not sure how long is, oh, Crash Course is just a thing that keeps going. Wow. I think that there's a reason why a lot of people call Hank Science Daddy on the internet. All right, we were done here, right? So we were done that. I'm going to just do the summarize to see if there's anything like that we really haven't covered yet here. Discuss how the brain constructs the mind, challenging traditional, yep. She argues that the brain's most crucial role is allostasis, the predictive regulation of the body's, yep, we've been there, done that. I might need to put I might need to institute a consciousness cooldown timer on this stream. Like maybe like a couple weeks, you know, and then we can have our consciousness day, and then we got to put another cooldown timer. To get information from the environment, we need to make action. Minimal action is that act of spending energy. FEP appears later as aftermath. Right, so I guess, I guess that's one way to say, yeah, because you'd have to point out the interpretation of free energy would be one that you have to make afterwards. Like you're kind of retrospectively making that type of interpretation. Maybe a goof off day. We usually do goof off days on Fridays. Usually that's just like we'll watch whatever and we can go in any direction, but Stan, do not go into consciousness. It will get us sent back weeks. Darmadon 2024. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, but usually we do that on Fridays. But that usually spills over into Saturday and Sunday. So we could do silly stuff Saturday, Sunday. When I say silly stuff, chances are we're going to be watching some of these videos. We're going to be learning more about Alex O'Connor on God and consciousness and stuff. Oh, man, we're still back at consciousness. Rawr. My apologies. All right, brain's primary job, allostasis versus homeostasis. Yep. Explaining that allostasis is about efficient and predictive energy regulation across, right? Once again, I think when Damasio was using homeostasis, I think he was incorporating allostasis. I don't know, maybe he was writing it at a time when that distinction wasn't made in the broader scene, but the body budget metaphor, yep, we've been there. Interoception and affect, brain architecture for allostasis, yep. Prediction signals, yep. Embodied concepts. Here we go. Oh, yeah. Limbic system reinterpretation. The traditional views of the limbic system. Yep. We went through that recently. Meaning from prediction. Yes. Okay, this is her affective realism, maybe? The meaning of external and internal events derives from the brain's internal prediction signals. These predictions are automatic, fast, and continuous, shaping perception and experience, as shown by the blobby bee image. The brain models the sensory surfaces of the body, not the world directly, making meaning by integrating. Yep. Okay, so this is all stuff that she says in the 7.5 lessons about the brain. Yep, we are pro Lisa Feldman Barrett here. We do still have to watch this. I'm going to keep it in this one, and we'll load it up on Saturday or Sunday, whenever I'm back. 100-minute vid, real quick. What is this? So silly stuff as in Sam Harris debates. Free energy principle are the modeling happening inside and updating. I need to go. I know that the Friston said that the free energy principle is like a law of thermodynamics. I have to really learn more about that side of this story at some point. Granted, it's not really that important. You know, I think it's more important that we get these the requisite neuroscience in order to understand these models of consciousness. And granted, I guess free energy principles right there, and it's connected with allostasis, but I don't know. 100 minutes vid. It'll be fast. We watched that 3-hour doctor. Yeah, we did do that, but that took us 2 days, I think, and 2 weekend days. That was like a long time. I'm always cautious when laws of thermodynamics is brought out. Uh-oh. This is scale free. We can start everywhere we like. That's the beauty. Yep, no, it is fun learning all this stuff. I think last year, even though I did learn a lot about the brain for the sake of writing part 1 of the document, last year was a lot about just developing the document, and it wasn't about learning new stuff. And this year has been, or I guess ever since like October, has been all about learning new stuff, and it's been pretty exciting. But it's also a little chaotic, because I have to now try to keep all these things in my head. There's so many outstanding things I need to do now for the document, both part 1 and part 2. Things I want to update in part 1, things I need to add to part 2, and I'm trying to write all the notes down as we're going through things. But a lot of this stuff is going to have to just be in my head as like ways to go about doing something when we get to it. So watch time. What's the watch time? 0 secs. What's up with that? 0 seconds. How do we figured out how to get around this, right? Isn't there a different follow age? Is that how we do it? I'm not following myself. Yeah, Onion, how you're what's the word here? Stun? Showing off? Man, a year and a half. You would need to study whole life. I mean, that's probably going to end up being what I do, but it depends what we study. This is an exercise in what is the most efficient way to study things for the sake of being able to understand how to answer these questions. So the stream is too interesting to give up. I appreciate that. Hopefully we'll keep it interesting. We'll keep updating the topic at play here. We've got February coming up, biases and habits. We'll have to do a deep dive into those. Man, these are just too large of topics for 1 month, especially when we keep getting stuck on consciousness. Because for part 2, we mostly did a good job, except we really need to spend a lot more time on emotion regulation and the cognitive function here. Like, these are missing. We're about to do automatic behaviors now. We already did our personal context, but we're going to need to do a lot of work on that section. So I don't know. It's going to be tough. I don't know when I actually start writing, like really distilling the stuff that we have here and writing. And then I think we're like March we have our meditation month. So that's we have to do that. And perhaps we could start working on stuff while we're doing that. But April, we're jumping all the way to the thinking. We're talking about thinking, persuasion. We're talking about logic, rational thinking, speech, communication. April, it starts getting real. Okay. I don't think there's anyone else on Twitch that's doing this. Nice. This is the ones, but thank you. There's another channel that does philosophy and economics type stuff. It's kind of depressing because it watches vids about how terrible the U.S. is. Jeez. Sometimes it branches off into EU. Is that chat? I like Stan's channel because it deals more in science. Well, I'm glad that you appreciate that part of I don't think a lot of people appreciate that part of what I'm trying to do, but I think that when we talk about some of the more loose philosophy, we need to make sure that we're always still grounded in the science. All right, I gotta head out. Have a good rest of the night, everyone.